Jeffrey.
The mute. Good evening. Welcome. We're going to wait a few minutes for people to join us and we'll get started. We'll be starting in one moment. I'll just get the last few people to log on. Good evening. My name is Shauna Friedman. I'm the Executive Director of Shalom Task Force. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're here today to talk about more dating goals questions. And this is part 2, and you could always catch part 1 on our website, really talking about how to have emotionally healthy relationships. Before we get started, I wanted to share with you a little bit about Shalom Task Force and their work that we do. Shalom Task Force is an agency that combats domestic violence and helps foster healthy relationships. We do this through 3 main services. We have our hotline, which now has expanded to also be, in addition to phone, to also be text chat and live chat online. You can also reach us through WhatsApp. And just if you're interested, it's 1-888-883-2323, and there'll be a trained advocate to help you there. And we're open tonight if there's any questions you may have. After this, we also have our legal services and we have our educational programming. Tonight, you're going to hear from Avital Levin, our Director of Education, and Yeshaya Kraus, our Community Engagement Education Manager, around more dating goals. We look forward to be with you this evening, and we look forward to hearing from you. We hope this is helpful. We've gotten an incredible response from our first webinars, and I'm looking forward to listening and learning with you. Have a wonderful evening.
Welcome. I'm Avital Levin, a social worker and Director of Education for Shalom Task Force. Each time we hold an educational program, we are one step closer to living our mission of safe relationships, healthy families, and a supportive community. I'm joined by Yeshaya Kraus, our Community Engagement and Education Manager. We held this program a few months ago, and there was tremendous follow-up. Additional questions submitted, calls and texts to our hotline, stories and feedback shared with us. One of the most powerful messages shared with me after part 1 of this dating program was from a woman who reached out to me and said, "You reminded me that everyone deserves a healthy relationship, no matter their background." This message gave me a lot of hope. It is our intention to reinforce this message and to provide a framework for identifying healthy dating practices and relationships. So we covered many points about recognizing healthy, unhealthy, and abusive patterns of relationships in our part 1 of this webinar, which you can find on our website, shalomtaskforce.org. And tonight's content is based on questions curated from this feedback, as well as years of questions raised at educational programs and in calls to our hotline. So for tonight, we have curated another top 10 frequently asked questions about dating and relationships. The program's emphasis will be on the dater with the role of parents or mentors as support. Questions can be submitted throughout the webinar using the Q&A feature. We have already received questions in advance to this webinar, and we'll do our best to address as many questions as we can. But of course, we encourage you, we won't be able to address everything tonight, so we encourage you to reach out to our hotline. We see tonight's program as a springboard for ongoing dialogue and support, and hopefully it will provide the framework for you to continue the conversation. The length of tonight's program has been condensed, and additional resources can be found on our website. This program is being recorded. We got a lot of questions about that, and that recording will be available on the website probably starting tomorrow morning. Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for managing the marketing and technology aspects of this webinar. And Yeshaya, if you could please introduce yourself.
Sure. So hi, I'm Yeshaya Kraus. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, I'm a couples therapist, and I'm the community engagement and education manager for Shalom Task Force. I know it's quite a mouthful. Dating in a way that can lead to setting up a healthy relationship is really, it's such an important topic and has so many different moving parts. It's very complicated, it's complex, but if you're dating in a way which you can set up that healthy relationship, it can be so rewarding. And it's really gratifying to see how so many people are joining us tonight to join us in this discussion and hopefully come away with some concrete ideas to use going forward in your own relationships. I was talking to someone earlier who referenced the tagline on our flyer about how important it is to have a spouse who's emotionally healthy. And the person said, I wish I had known that when I was going out. All the people who are here tonight have a chance to know it and to understand what emotionally healthy relationships are, and hopefully to be able to use that knowledge in their own relationships.
So let's launch right in. We'll start with the first question, which we have been asked many times. Will I be able to have a normal relationship? And we have been asked this question most often by individuals who are concerned about their ability to have a healthy relationship because of their family background. Or sometimes we get this question due to something personal that concerns them within themselves. Perhaps they struggle to maintain close friendships, or they feel insecure about what they have to offer in a relationship. A story that comes to mind when I think about individuals who are scared about their ability to have a normal relationship is from a time when I presented a workshop on a college campus, and it was a mixed crowd of students. There were about 50 students in the room, and at the end of the program, one of the students came over to me and she broke down crying, and I took her aside and we spoke for a few minutes, and she was just crying and crying, and she shared that this was the first time that she had seen everything that she grew up with, everything that has been going on in her home for the past over 20 years. She saw it just laid out clearly in terms of education and in terms of the description of some of the patterns and dynamics of an abusive relationship. And she shared that for the first time ever, she is away at school. She was a student who was dorming at her college, and she was doing really well. She said she's been feeling happy. She's doing great with her classes, and she actually just started dating someone. And she was dating a lovely boy who treated her well, and she was feeling great about the relationship. But at the same time, she was feeling devastated about the fact that her mother and younger sister were still living at home with her abusive father. And she felt a tremendous sense of guilt, the way that she described it, for being away from that situation now, for being able to kind of move on and start her own life and to be doing well and feeling happy. And I think about this student a lot when we think about this idea of being afraid about starting a normal relationship or being able to maintain a healthy relationship, because sometimes people are plagued by a sense of fear that maybe whatever they experience in their home, whether it was abusive, whether it was dysfunctional, maybe that's something that they are just doomed and bound to repeat in their own relationships. Or maybe like this young woman, There will also be other challenges associated with actually going on and having a healthy relationship, which in her case was that sense of survivor's guilt. Is she allowed to even move on and be happy and have a good relationship if somebody else in her family, in that case, her mother, her sister, are still at home in that very difficult, abusive situation? So we encourage everybody to think about not only whether somebody is able to, work on starting to build a healthy relationship, but to think about reaching out and getting professional help in any cases of someone coming from a situation of trauma, coming from a home where there was abuse, getting help early on, reaching out, speaking to a mental health professional is something that can serve as a tremendously supportive forum for somebody to utilize when they are dating. This woman in this situation actually followed up with me and shared that program encouraged her to reach out. She made a plan, she made an appointment with a mental health professional at her counseling center on campus, and she was hoping to kind of start a journey of reflection and healing on her home environment and how that might impact her. Yeshaya?
Yeah, so you have to think about it, but so that's talking about obviously very powerful story of somebody who's coming from an environment where they saw unhealthy relationships. That was just what they experienced as a child. And you think about it, people are asking this kind of question of, will I be able to have a normal relationship regardless of what their actual family background is like? I mean, many people these days, they've either heard stories from someone who knows someone, or they themselves know someone who's gone through a bad experience in terms of a relationship with young divorces, or have come from, have seen friends who have bad relationships and are currently trying to work through things. And on the one hand, these things really could happen to anyone. It's very true. There's no way to be certain that it won't happen. On the other hand, if you're able to be open with both yourself and with the person you're going out with, the person you're trying to create a relationship with, you can really figure out what kind of relationship you want, and you can make a commitment to really working together to realize that goal. And that's a strong step that you can really take to make sure that you build something healthy and that you build something that's loving and caring, instead of letting it spiral into what could become a bad relationship. I think most of the time, people who have bad relationships are not intentional about it. They're not mindful about it. They're not saying anything like, okay, here I go, I'm going to make myself a bad relationship. Most people don't do that. Having a bad relationship for the most part is a matter of being reactive. It's a matter of not being able to cope with the natural conflicts that are part of building that kind of relationship. If you're proactive in the way you build your relationship and you have in mind what you want and where you want to go with it, and you're both on the same page, you stand a very good chance of keeping things way healthier than you would if you would just kind of like let things go as they would. And this is this time of dating and this time of being faced with that task of creating such a close relationship, it can be very scary for exactly those reasons. And it can also be a time when you decide that you're going to chart your own course and you're going to do things potentially different than the things you may have seen that you didn't like. And having that kind of a discussion with the person you're going out with can be major. You're not the only player here. You're not the only person who's in the game, so to speak. And you can work together on it. You can work together to create something that you'll both be not only proud of, but that you can both be safe and comfortable with. Things like this, a mentor is very helpful with. And Avital mentioned going for professional help, even if you're not going to go for professional help per se, but you have somebody who you trust, who you can really speak to, and that you can really bounce things off of, help you define a common vision, both of you together, really. And maybe even if you've seen traumatic or scary things that you've seen, to help you to kind of go through that and discuss what implications that may have on what you want your vision to look like. That can be very helpful for you. even if it's something, you mentioned before, the idea of not having confidence in your ability to hold a relationship just because of yourself, something you're aware of in yourself, which first of all takes a tremendous amount of self-awareness. So if you're at that step, then you're doing pretty well right there. Just acknowledging that you have trouble in any particular area is a big deal. There are those who go through life who are not able to acknowledge that. So kudos to you if this is you. So it may be worth getting a different perspective by speaking to somebody just by yourself about what you want out of a relationship. You may have trouble, say, building a relationship, making friends maybe you've had trouble with, or maybe you've been able to connect with people, but you've never really been sure where to go from there. Getting an outsider's perspective can help you to understand why that may be true, like what's behind the fact that you've been having trouble with it. And an outsider's perspective can potentially help you work on building skills to be able to make sure that you're able to not just build, but to sustain and deepen a relationship.
Yeah, thank you, Shaya. So let's move into question number 2.
This is a good one.
How do I bring up something I am embarrassed of? And I'll pull a question that we received from someone. Someone shared, I am ashamed that I went through a phase when I was hiding aspects of my life from people, not being shomer negia and hiding this from friends. How much do I need to share about my past with the person I am dating? This question comes up often for many individuals. We hear this a lot actually in collaboration with Kala teachers who are supporting individuals through the engagement phase. And Yeshaya, we were just discussing how based on the survey that we administered to over 100 Kala teachers just in the past couple of weeks, so much of that theme of secrecy, so much of the complexity around navigating the halachos related to shomer negia, navigating issues around sexuality. That comes up very often in the Orthodox Jewish framework around dating and engagement. So of course, with that, this question comes up often. And we've been asked this question. And so just in general, to kind of think about some of the experiences that people who are dating carry around feelings of guilt and shame. Some of the ones that and these are just some, kind of a short list of some of these themes, we've identified issues related to the following experiences. Religious, and this could be anything like somebody feeling guilty about not davening enough or not learning enough or not davening with a minyan. Phone use on Shabbos, we've encountered that. Issues around tznius, and especially for women growing up with a lot of messages that are handed over by either schools or families or community in general about tznius, what to wear, what not to wear, how to carry yourself, how to talk. So those are some of the issues around the religious shame and guilt that people experience. And other issues that people often experience embarrassment about, and this comes up with dating, is any forms of substance use, sexual activity, trauma, financial difficulty, family dynamics. And that's kind of just our, short list, Yeshaya, that we were discussing earlier. Yeah. You want to continue with that?
Yeah, I mean, if we would want to put together like a more comprehensive list, we could theoretically be here all night. And the truth is that shame is so different for so many different people. You could have one person who goes through a particular experience and is very ashamed, and the other person goes through the same exact experience and considers it something to be really proud of. So this is just a small snapshot of things that can technically impact your ability to participate in a healthy relationship. The fact is that it wouldn't really be fair to anyone to keep issues that are impacting your life negatively from someone you're going out with. If you want a healthy relationship, it does need to be part of the conversation at some point. The question is exactly how to make it part of that conversation. First thing to think about, and here's some food for thought. You can kind of take this and sit with it for a little bit. You have to figure out where you are in regard to whatever the issue is. Are you struggling with it currently? Is this something that's going on right now? Is this something that is really having a major impact on your day-to-day life as you stand right now, as you are dating right now? Is the impact out of control or is it under control? How consistently does it impact your daily life? So where are you in relation to this issue? What are you up to? Is this something that's big in your life now or not? If it is something that's major, then you got to figure out a way to address it. If it's not something that's major now, you may be able to push it off a little bit. One way or the other, if it's impacting you in the here and now, it needs to be brought up. It needs to be discussed. Don't think that getting married is going to fix things, because it won't. There's absolutely no chance that marriage is ever going to fix something that you've been struggling with or working with for however long as you've been working with it. Whatever way you bring it in is going to end up making it part of the relationship. So let's say you're bringing this in. You have your secret, whatever the secret is. We can just pick one from the list before. Let's say let's pick substance use.
Maybe let's stick with that actual example of somebody who felt shame about not being shomer negia and hiding.
Sure. Okay. So let's stick with the shomer negia thing. So let's say it's something which is still an issue and you're struggling with it, and you know that you shouldn't be doing it, you feel you shouldn't be doing it, whatever the exact situation is, and you choose to hide it. If you bring it in as a secret, it becomes part of the relationship. It does, but it becomes part of the relationship as something that you must keep secret at all costs. You hide it, and that secrecy is going to create distance, and that distance becomes part of your relationship. Whereas if you're open about it and you say, this is what I'm struggling with, this is what's going on, and this is who I am, and this is part of who I am, then that brings it into the relationship as something which is open, something which is honest. And doing that in a healthy way can be a move towards making that honesty a foundation of your relationship. Making a decision to create a relationship with that being an open and honest part of it creates a closeness in a relationship, and it creates a good foundation. Let's go through a few other examples. People struggling with their religiosity not being where it should be. So sometimes people feel like, oh, I should be this from, I should be that from, should be more than I am right now. So sometimes people think, oh, okay, well, I'm going to get married and then I'll have my spouse as a supervisor. That's not a good position for you to be in, and it's not a good position for your spouse to be in. Inappropriate internet use is sometimes people think, oh, well, I'll just get married and that'll go away. It's not going to go away. It's a part of who you are. It's something that it's coming from an emotional source. It's grounded in your personality, and it's not going anywhere until you've actually dealt with it properly. And bringing another person into the mix is not a cure-all. It just ends up cycling right back to acknowledgement. You need to acknowledge that the issue is there, and you need to figure out how you're going to deal with it. And part of acknowledging it is bringing it in openly into your relationships. Something that I was told when I was in school, and this just really stuck with me. You're talking about working with people who have different diagnoses, and the line that stuck with me was, "You're not bipolar." That was the diagnosis we were discussing. You're a person who struggles with bipolar mood disorder, or depression, whatever. You can stick in whatever mental health diagnosis you want to stick in there. They're all pretty much, the idea is the same. Shame comes from over associating yourself with the issue at hand. So let's say you are struggling with your religiosity. There are two ways to look at it. You can say, I'm not as religious as I should be, or you can say, this is one of the struggles that I'm facing as a person. The second way of doing it is that it's part of your life. It's part of your experience, but it's not you. You're not labeling yourself as, this is who I am. Everybody has struggles. Struggles are part of life. Conflict is part of life. It's part of a relationship too. You're going to end up having conflict. The question is how you look at them. Do you look at it as a challenge that you're facing, as something which is not part of you, or as an integral part of who you are?
Yeah, and going with that, I think that sometimes people do fall into the trap of oversharing and mistaking intimacy with needing to share every single thing that is on my mind, every single thing I have ever felt, or every single thing I have ever experienced in my life. And that if I just kind of share everything, then we'll be like so close. And I think that that also can sometimes, land somebody in the trap of not being skillful of how and what they're sharing and when they're sharing that. And like you mentioned earlier, Yishai, that obviously there is that self-preservation piece for people to consider when dating and when thinking about what to share and how to share. And we did receive a couple of questions exactly about that piece now. The other thing also is, sometimes when individuals feel almost like they're going to let their shame drive the decision making. So that ends up being something that can be very disrespectful to themselves or can feel degrading. Feeling like, because I feel so ashamed of this, now I'm almost going to just put myself in the kind of like a confessional booth and tell the person these terrible things that I've done that I'm ashamed about, and that will almost absolve me. And that can actually make somebody feel pretty exposed, pretty vulnerable, and perhaps it doesn't yield the kind of safety or security or closeness that they were hoping to seek out in that relationship. So a kind of a good rule of thumb that we've discussed is, again, kind of consulting with that trusted mentor or that mental health professional, whoever it is, about sharing and how to best share with somebody.
Yeah, and I think that the idea behind sharing everything just to kind of get it off your chest, like there can be that momentary thing where you feel like so good about yourself because like, okay, it's out in the open now, but then because it wasn't done in a way which is thought out and is stage appropriate, it can totally backfire. It can be looked at as a total boundary violation. Like, okay, this is like way too much information. I can't process this. And it doesn't end up well. So it's a lot of things do need to be shared, but they have to be done in a mindful way, which brings us to our next question. This is a question that came in, and it was specifically, do I need to bring up my mental health issues? But I think that this really speaks to a much broader issue, which we're going to kind of flesh out in the way we look at it. Let's talk about a few different details. How do I bring up mental health issues in myself? So, as we said before, with things that are ashamed of, not that mental health issues are at all anything to be ashamed of. Again, they're a part of life. They're challenges that many people face. If I remember correctly, this is another thing from one of my professors in school. 9 out of 10 people in America should be in therapy. 4 out of 10 maybe are. Mental health struggles it's just part of life. It's who we are. It's definitely nothing to be ashamed of. At the same time, again, it's something which is going to have an impact on your relationship, which you're trying to create, and it does need to be brought up. If you don't talk about it, aside from the impact of the issue itself, then you do have that secrecy that you're bringing into the relationship, and it's going to end up coming out anyway. There's a right and wrong way to do it, but the other person has a right to understand what you're dealing with and how you're dealing with it, what you're doing. And it could have a very big impact on their lives, and they should be prepared, just as you should be educated about what's going on with you. If you're dealing with a mental health issue or a medical issue, or whatever the issue is, you deserve to know what you're dealing with, just for your own sake. And it's the same if you're looking to marry someone. They have a right to understand exactly what the story is. You have to be informed, so do they.
Yeah. If I might just pipe in now, right now we actually got a couple more questions about this piece. For parents, I think mental health considerations is a particularly hot button issue. I've had this conversation with so many parents coming from both sides of the camp, really. Parents who feel strongly about wanting to know about any mental health issues or medication usage ahead of time so that they can protect their children when they're dating, perhaps reject a shidduch altogether. as well as from parents who feel fiercely protective of their children and want to safeguard their privacy so as to encourage shidduch prospects, right? And that kind of can speak to whether a parent wants to almost hide any kind of disclosure of mental health issues at all costs and kind of just push the shidduch through, get that person to, down the aisle, we'll deal with it after, nobody really needs to know. So we really, I think that, we could definitely relate to this from both sides. And as you mentioned so clearly, Isha, really, being able to recognize this topic and this question, I think from probably like all of these questions, to be one that's very complex, and to really encourage individuals around this question to consult with medical providers, rabbanim, mental health professionals, really anybody who's kind of on your support team of providing wise and professional and reliable, responsible guidance. This issue of mental health and disclosure around it is one that we really seek, we really encourage people to seek support for.
Yeah, totally. And I think that another, just on that point, another really important thing is that sometimes people will feel guilty or bad turning down something that they've done the research on, and they honestly feel that they can't deal with it. I mean, you're the only person who can actually decide. You're dating, and with the help of your support group, you are the one who's responsible to make that decision. Is this something that I can make space for in my life? You have to, as we said, you have to know whether it's you or the person you're seeing, you have to know what the plan is, have to know how it's being dealt with, what the possible impact is. And if you end up making the decision that this is not something that I can work with, presuming that this is somebody that you're seeing, it's okay to make that decision. There doesn't have to be guilt or shame or feeling like a bad person if you're deciding this is not something that I can make space for in my life. It's not just okay to make that decision if it's honestly something that you can't deal with. It's important to make that decision. If you're saying yes to something that you just are not able to cope with, or you honestly feel you're not going to be able to cope with, then you're not doing yourself any favors. You're not doing the other person any favors either. And I think it's important for parents to be aware of this and to support those priorities. Like, on the one hand, everybody wants their children to be able to get married and to find the right person. It has to be looked at as a process, and it has to be looked at as something which is healthy and good for the person, and not just like a checkbox that's like, okay, married, check, cha-ching. But it's important for the people who are supporting kids who are dating, or people who are dating, to support those priorities. Very important. The question comes up, like, so talking about now specifically when you're seeing mental health issues on the person you're going out with, thing number one to consider is what are you seeing, and are these things that you're seeing yourself and you suspect? Are these things that your date has been open about, that they've discussed with you openly? So for things that you're seeing, you got to speak it over with someone to figure out exactly what's going on before you jump to any conclusions. There are definitely all sorts of different possibilities for what may be going on. Like, let's say you're looking at somebody and you think maybe they're rude. You think maybe they could just have a short attention span. Like, that's just one example of two different ways to potentially interpret something that happened. You may feel differently about one option over the other. So do some research, speak to some references, ask pointed questions that speak directly to the issue that you're looking for. And you might want to bring it up directly at some point if it's something that you're convinced is a medical or mental health issue, and see what the reaction is. Same with parents. Parents can sometimes pick up on these little vibes that their children may be bringing home from dates. And you got to be able to pick up on these vibes to figure out exactly what it is that's bothering you about it, figure out who to speak to, and go through all the pertinent information with the person that you're speaking to. Let's say the person is being open about whatever their struggles are. As we said before, try to get a handle on how it's going to impact you. Like, let's say everything is going along well and the person says, I have issue X, I'm working with challenge B, whatever it is, what's the plan? How are they dealing with it? And is that something you can deal with? Also, something to keep in mind is how open are they being about the issue? Is the person addressing it in a way which suggests that they have a healthy relationship with the issue? Or is it something like that the shopman says, okay, by the way, it's date 5 and you have to talk about this. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll talk about it. But they're discussing it at a bare minimum, or are they comfortable with it? Are they open with it? Another thing to think about is that if things are getting kind of serious, you might want to meet with whoever is responsible for their care, whether it's their therapist or with medical issues, their medical doctor, just to really get an informed handle on not just the general issues, but how that impacts this person in the here and now.
Yeah, Yishai, we actually, we got a number of questions already that came in, but one of them is related to this one, the medication question. So I'll just read it out. Sometimes on a first date, the guy will say something like, you're not on any medication for anxiety or depression, right? These are usually guys in their 40s. I don't think that's an appropriate question for a first date. What do I say? So.
You want to go first?
Yeah, just some light, conversation for a first date. No big deal. I mean, well, I have some thoughts. Do you have, I think that the way that the person who asked this question, and thank you for posing this question to us. I think the question of, what do I say? I think personally, I think that if somebody is being direct and straightforward about how they're saying something on a date, I think it's fair game for you to also feel comfortable responding in that same kind of straightforward nature. So, you're sharing in your question that you don't think that's an appropriate question for a first date. So maybe sharing your feelings about that question, to me, sounds like a very fair response. Yeshaya, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that if somebody's willing to ask that kind of question on the first date, that kind of says something about what kind of conversations they're going to be having. Maybe this person has been burned before. I don't know. It's
right. Or wants to kind of or doesn't want to waste time with dating, right? Wants to cut to the chase. Wants to be able to put all the cards on the table. Be upfront.
But you're going to end up having conversations like that going forward. If you decide to go ahead with this particular shidduch, then just understand that that's something that you're probably going to end up encountering in more than just discussions about anxiety medications on the first date.
Yeah.
I don't think it's so much a question of appropriate or not appropriate. Different people are obviously going to have different comfort levels. But I think what is important to acknowledge is that this is the type of conversation that you are more than likely to have with this kind of person, or with this person in particular. So just something to bear in mind.
Yeah, wow, we have so many questions coming in now, but I'm looking at the time, and let's move along. Let's move along to number 4, our next question.
Okay, hang on a second.
So this question, I just feel nervous around girls or around women. What should I do?
Yeah.
And we get this question also, of course. I feel nervous around men. What should I do? Yeah.
So this is an interesting one. I suspect that this comes up more when people are first starting out in dating. Presumably, if it becomes a problem that they realize that they just feel very uncomfortable, hopefully people are going to look to get some kind of support on that issue. Everyone starts out pretty much in the same boat, I think. The only difference is how you deal with that feeling. The only way to get experience, as with everything else, is to actually do it. Just get in there and talk to girls. Get in there, talk to your dates, have discussions, feel awkward, get over it.
Yeah, but Yeshai, I think that this point is pretty jarring for a lot of individuals in the Orthodox community who grew up, many of us grew up feeling very much like the messages that we were receiving and being socialized to again, tznius, Don't
Yes,
feel, don't, if you're a base Yaakov girl, never talk to, don't even breathe in the
it's
direction
shocking.
of
It
a
is shocking.
woman.
I didn't say, by the way, when I said get over it, I didn't mean to make light of it.
Right,
Obviously, it's
yeah,
an
of
issue.
course,
It's
of
it's
course.
a big issue.
Yeah, no, but of course, but as we've spoken about, that almost, that total, roundabout, not roundabout, that about face of just overnight. And again, so many of the messages that college teachers, and Chassan teachers share with us about almost that like shock to the system,
Mhm.
go from never looking at a guy, never talking to a woman, to overnight being on a date for a few hours, and being expected to kind of just be like smooth and witty and personable and comfortable and laid back, and that is for a lot of people very nerve-wracking, of course.
Yeah, for sure. So I think a lot of the nerve wracking comes from, as we said, lack of experience, lack of exposure, and the fact is, meeting new people can be nerve wracking. There are some people who do it really well, some people who just plain don't. So one helpful perspective to have is that the person you're dating doesn't have to be defined exclusively as, oh no, I'm talking to a girl. If your background is one in which you have not had much exposure to the opposite gender, it makes a lot of sense that you look at them as the opposite gender, because that's the most obvious thing about them. You're looking at them face value. I'm talking to somebody who is a girl. The more you get to know about the person as an individual, the more you'll see other things, the more they'll be a whole person instead of a girl or a boy. They'll be an individual with likes, interests, dislikes. You'll get to know that, and you'll be able to paint a whole picture of the person as an individual, the same way almost that you would get to know a new friend from school or a new friend from yeshiva or from work. You can get to know your date. And being of the opposite gender, it's a part of what makes them different from you. It's not the whole thing. And it takes some work. You have to get to know the person, but that's what will hopefully end up happening. A part of this question that comes up a lot is, how do you know that you're not going to freeze up? And you might, it's fine. That's part of life. The point of dating is to get to know someone. That includes the things that they're nervous about, the things that get them excited, what they're like when they mess up. When you have a moment when your words just get completely scrambled on their way out of your mouth, and you say something that probably might not even be English. You're human. It's okay. You can be nervous. You don't have to make yourself nuts about not being the smoothest person in the world. It's just part of the way life goes.
Right. And if you're somebody who watches romantic rom-com movies, just
Boy.
unwatch everything you've ever seen, because dating and looks so like easy and effortless, and everybody is smooth, and just know that all of those lines have been written by professionals who are earning top dollars to churn out these kind of like box office hits, right? So
Yeah.
nobody is that smooth. And I think that actually, if we can move along to the next question,
Yeah, this is a good one.
because I'm hoping that we'll have time to perhaps a little later address some of the questions that have come in. We have received now several more questions related to mental health disclosures, and I hope that, I don't know if we'll be able to get to that tonight, but that is definitely a topic that we can continue to talk about maybe in another webinar. So let's move along to the next question. How important is attraction? And we actually, we put this question down on our list of questions that we would address tonight in the webinar. And in the past couple of days, we again received this question of how important is attraction? And some of the, I think, most common responses that when we've spoken with people and asked different people who are dating, what are some of the responses people have given you when you ask them how important is attraction? And what are some of the helpful responses? What have been some of the hurtful responses? So in general, some of the responses that people commonly receive are, the person will grow on you, just keep going out, it comes with time. Attraction isn't important. That's one that people do receive. Look at all the other important aspects of the person and all the other, important priorities in life. and this is not such a big deal. This is not such an important part of it. And then we look at, again, most recently, the college teacher survey that shows how many challenges are related to individuals who are dating and engaged and married, not really being given the proper forum and the ability and perhaps even the space and courtesy to be able to share that something is not working in the relationship, and that perhaps that thing that is not working is a total lack of attraction. And that is something that that we've spoken about. So in a situation where somebody is, and I'm thinking of somebody who recently spoke with me about that they were dating someone for a while and they really weren't attracted to the person, and they almost like could not, they just weren't feeling it, and and others were just pushing them and encouraging them to just kind of ignore those feelings. So I think just same as what we've discussed very much in part one of our webinar, but again, it's really important to reiterate here tonight that anytime you're in a situation where somebody who you're speaking with about a concern in your dating or relationship life just tells you to ignore your feelings, that there's a real risk here. Perhaps the person who you're speaking with is not the right, not the right mentor for you. Perhaps that encouragement to ignore your feelings is very much going against what we encourage everybody to think about, which is really to trust your gut. And if something feels off, you do need to honor that. You do need to explore those feelings more. You do need to get to the bottom of why you're feeling that way in the relationship. And so that's something that we need to reinforce that message here tonight. I think another piece that comes up related to this issue is one that we've spoken with a number of individuals who experience something different related to attraction. And again, bringing up that Shomer Negia piece, which is one that so many people grapple with during dating, is that piece taking on such a significant role in the relationship where it can almost serve as a distraction to whatever else is going on. Right, where we've spoken about the person who was sharing with us how they were just kind of so eager to they were so attracted to the person they were dating, and they were so eager to be able to get to that phase in the relationship where they didn't have to where they would be able to touch that person, and that almost fueled some of the other elements of the relationship where they were ignoring all kinds of other factors and issues that were coming up, and single-handedly focusing on that piece and that attraction piece serving almost as in some ways, like a blinding force in the relationship. Okay, so Yishai, you look like you have something to add to that.
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay, so let's talk some more about how exactly we can understand attraction, because of course attraction is not it's not just physical. So sometimes when people do give that advice of just wait, see if the person grows on you, see if it comes, I think what we're looking for generally with attraction is a building up of finding overall things that you are finding yourself becoming more attracted to the person about. And that could be that all of a sudden you're realizing that you love the person's smile, or they have a great sense of humor, and you find yourself always laughing when you're with them, and you start feeling good about the way you feel around that person. And that can almost create some kind of like an emotional connection, and in some ways an emotional attraction to the person. Or you find that there are things that are, a little bit more, as you start to like the person more, you start feeling a little bit like the attraction is growing. So one thing we definitely want to point out is repulsion is that's actually something to be very, very aware of. If anybody is ever feeling repulsed by the person that they're dating, and that's not going away. I can't imagine any really responsible mentor telling somebody to ignore that, right? That's something that we would very much caution against ignoring, and that's something to be very honest about.
Yeah, and just that feeling itself, like physical attraction is maybe it's definitely a part of attraction, and there are other kinds of attraction, as you mentioned, emotional attraction and that kind of stuff. But if the physical attraction is the opposite of attraction, if you actually feel like you just don't want to be around this person because you're just repulsed, then that's not going anywhere. I think I have this really great story here, just in terms of being able to just acknowledge attraction. As we mentioned before, the idea of talking to girls is like something that people maybe aren't used to in certain circles. And then you start dating and it's a whole paradigm shift. You're looking at things entirely differently. So the story went that this guy was going out on a date, and he went out, I think, a couple of times. And the shadchan was talking, so do you want to keep going? And he said no, he's hemming and hawing. He's not really being very clear about what his reason is. The shadchan says, do you find her attractive? And the answer was a very enthusiastic no. And basically what happened there was the shadchan was giving permission to this person to consider that as part of the decision-making process. And it's an important part of the decision-making process. Obviously there are many different parts of marriage, there are many different parts of a relationship, but attraction is an important one. It's a very important part of marriage, and it's something that you need to really give yourself permission to think about. People are going to dance around it sometimes. They're not going to name it unless they really consciously tell themselves that it's okay to acknowledge it. Sometimes people consider continuing with the date just because they feel bad calling off something because of something like that. It's embarrassing, it's taboo, it's not sneeze, it's not important, or you feel low saying, oh, I just don't like the way the person looks. But that's an important part of married life. It's an important part of a relationship, being attracted to each other. So yeah, it could develop. It could develop if there's something if there's like something there at the core. But if what's at the core is actively feeling like I don't want to be around this person, then that's something to acknowledge and something to really respect and give yourself permission to consider that. I think that's a very important point to really consider. And again, for the people who are supporting it, for the shadchanim, for the parents, for the mentors, the rebbe, and the teachers who are helping people along, who are supporting people who are dating, this is something to really be aware of, that it's hard for people to discuss in certain situations, especially when they've never been in a situation where they're told it's okay to think about this stuff. It's a really important issue. It's a really important point to support and to look into. So, and that's like right at the beginning. Like, let's say you've kind of gotten to know each other a little bit and you're still not feeling it, then you start thinking about how you feel about the relationship as a whole. Some things to think about. Are you excited to see the other person again when you take leave of each other and you're finished with the date? What's the feeling there? Are you excited to meet again, or are you like, okay, thank God? If you're thinking a sigh of relief, and that sigh of relief is overpowering your interest in seeing the other person, then that's something to acknowledge also. When you're thinking about each other in between dates, what do you feel? So right after the date, some people are like just kind of like coming off of a kind of an anxious situation. Some people are more naturally anxious in these kinds of situations than others, as we said. So what are you feeling in between the dates? Are you feeling largely positive and optimistic? Are you feeling largely anxious? Do you have mixed feelings? That's normal too. You can feel attraction, you can feel nervous at the same time. What's the more powerful feeling for you? What's the sense that you're really getting out of this, and what's at the top of your mind? If somebody would wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, do you want to go out with this person again? What would your half asleep, tired answer be? That's pretty much where you're headed.
It's a good litmus test.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's
Yeah.
let's move along to the next question. And actually, there were a lot more questions that came in related to this this idea. So we'll mention it, and I'll kind of now weave in some of the questions that people typed in. I just found out something that concerns me about the person I am dating. What should I do? So that's obviously just number one, to really validate that's really rough, especially if this is somebody who you've already started to like. If somebody who you have feelings for, and now you just found out something concerning about this person, and of course, number one would be really to, we would want to know, is this something that the person has shared with you? Because that tells us one thing about, about the closeness or or this person's level of honesty and sharing in the relationship, or is this something you found out from somebody else about this person? And if that's the case, of course, a word of caution about clarifying information, about fact checking, finding out who the source of the information is before jumping to conclusions. There have been cases where people, have shared information and somebody is very alarmed, and then finding out that, I don't know, they were talking about the other Moshe Klein, and, so of course, confirming and clarifying if in fact, the information is correct and the source that it's coming from. Somebody actually asked our question that we get often, which is such an important question, and I think I'll bring it up here, and we'll kind of reshift some of what we were going to talk about, which is, if I'm going out with or thinking of going out with a guy who's divorced, how do I get accurate information about the guy's mental health or if he's emotionally stable? Usually the only people who will share openly with me are close friends of his ex, who are definitely not objective at all. And I think that this question that came up now is about divorce, specifically dating somebody who was previously married. But we can also kind of apply this to what we were talking about earlier today, Yeshaya, about really information in general. When people are looking to get accurate information about someone, when people are doing research, when people are calling up references, or even trying to figure out people who they can reach out to about this person, there are a lot of flaws and challenges and barriers to that whole process, because as our participant has shared, people might not be objective, right? So how many people will share the person? How many times have we spoken to somebody who will say, oh my gosh, the person was the biggest tzaddik. They were such a tzaddikas, and they were just married to this crazy person, right? And of course, it's hard to always then be able to parse out what is accurate about the information we're getting.
Yeah, it's a very tough call to make. You have to really be able to figure out exactly what's right and what's not. It really is very difficult.
For sure, and I think that I personally, and just I've counseled individuals who were dating for second time around marriages, and what they have actually found to be so helpful is speaking to, if possible, even speaking sometimes to actual exit, like family members or people who were even involved in that relationship, knowing that obviously whatever they'll be hearing, they take with a grain of salt, knowing that there's less objectivity, but they will in fact be able to collect more information that will in some ways be information that could be helpful to them once they're able to kind of piece out that, there were two sides and what was going on. Rather than just getting very contrived, very superficial information from just people who are less involved in the relationship and didn't really have such a front row seat to some of the real dynamics that were taking place. Right. So really kind of trying to collect information that has as much substance as possible. And I think that goes across the board. We're not just talking about, second time around situations here. We're just talking about in general.
Yeah. And the one, like I've heard the line said that the one thing that you're not going to get from references is anything besides a good report. So, like if these are the people they're telling you to talk to, then maybe find some other people to talk to also.
Right, for sure. Okay, so we're gonna have to move along here.
Yeah.
Let's just move to the next question. What if my family or friends don't like the person? Okay, so what if my family or friends don't like the person? And that is a really important consideration. If you're a person who has very healthy and close relationships with family and friends, and they don't like the person you're dating, that's something to really consider and to think about, and to be honest with yourselves, and to kind of try to get the self-awareness of, well, why might this be the case? And sometimes what we find is that when somebody tries, I'm thinking about somebody recently who was starting to hide a lot of information about the person they were dating and about their relationship with their family and closest friends. They were starting to hide things, and they were starting to lie about things. And that was actually a red flag, because it pointed to something that was going on in the relationship that they weren't able to be honest about with people who really care about them, who have their best interest at heart. And that to us speaks to something that might be not, in place in that relationship, something that might be going awry. So that definitely is something to look out for when we talk about, red flags: secrecy, hiding, lying to people. And of course, at the same time, there's also, that balance of recognizing, and I'll specifically use an example here to speak to parents, that sometimes we might be so protective of the people who we, whether it's our family, whether it's our friends, that perhaps we're missing something altogether about where they are at in their lives right now and the people who they are choosing to date. And I'll think of an example. I was speaking with a parent who was struggling to come to terms with a woman that their son was dating. And what came up in the conversation was how disappointed the parent was with the way that the woman dressed, with the kind of religious values she upheld or didn't uphold. And ultimately, the person, this parent was focusing a lot on the person that her son was dating, and why she was all wrong, and why she's a terrible influence on her son, and why she's, her son could do so much better, and he's just being blind to everything. And what this parent was failing to acknowledge was that her son had not been religious for quite some time already. And the hope that, of this parent, that once he would settle down and really start dating and find a marriage partner, that, things would turn around. If only he found the right marriage partner, that's when he would get kind of back on track with his life. So that was not panning out. And this parent's pain and disappointment that was being channeled towards this woman that the son was dating was really missing some of the honesty about coming to terms with where this parent's son was at and the kinds of marriage partner that he was seeking at that time, right? And I think that speaks to almost being aware, for the dater, being aware of how well the people in your life really know you, and for the parent in these situations to also be extremely honest about your child, where they're at, who in fact they are most compatible or aligned with now, and who they are seeking to date might speak to, their hopes and dreams for their marriage. And those might not be your hopes and dreams for their marriage, right? So really being aware of that, of that balance.
Yeah, and that's a very important message. Like there's so many stories that come out where parents are looking for the wrong person for their kid, and really trying to live their own dreams and not really making way for their children to live their dreams and their according to the values that they have. So that can be that's a very important message to acknowledge.
Yeah, and then getting back again to that other piece of if somebody is, their family and their friends really don't approve of the person, and maybe they're very concerned about the person that you're dating, being honest with yourself about whether when you insist that this person is just so good for you, but nobody else sees it somehow, just nobody else sees it, or this person, yeah, it's true, you guys are right that this person actually treated the other people that they dated or were married to or engaged to very, terribly. But it's different now. That person brought out the worst in them. But with me, it's different, right? So just really kind of being aware, trying to check in, have that honesty and self-awareness. And if you find yourself starting to feel very nervous in a relationship and lying a lot, and feeling like you almost need to keep a lot of separate compartments in your life, that very often can point to something concerning, right? If the family and friends who you were once very close with and who loved you and you loved are now in a totally separate compartment of your life, and the person you're dating is in this totally different compartment, and those two compartments shall never meet because we need to keep all the secrets and we need to keep everybody away from each other, that can really point to some real red flags going on in the relationship.
Yeah, and just to point out that it's not necessarily the red flag specifically in that relationship. It could be that there's some issues going on in the relationship with the friends or with the family that you're trying to keep in that separate compartment. That maybe this relationship honestly is good for you, and there are other things that you need to be aware of. There are a lot of different possibilities as to why you might feel the need to compartmentalize like that. And it's something that you owe it to yourself to address. So you deserve to have good, fulfilling relationships, not just with your spouse, but with your family and with your friends. And there's hopefully a way to be able to bridge that gap one way or the other.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pull together our last couple of questions.
Yeah. So let's see. Okay. Can I ask someone to change something about themselves? Okay. So everybody knows hopefully the story of the guy who went to the custom tailor and he orders a suit, and he comes back a couple of weeks later, the suit's ready, and the tailor is like helping him get the jacket on. The sleeve is too short and the buttons are a little off. It's like, oh, don't worry about it. You just move your shoulders over like that, and you'll just like bend over like this, and look, see, it's a perfect fit. Okay, great. So he walks out the door and he's walking down the street in this contorted form, and somebody's looking at him and says, like, look at this poor person. He's so contorted. I feel so bad. His body must be in constant pain. And then his friend says to him, yeah, but look at the guy's tailor. The guy's tailor is really great. Similarly, you're going to have in a relationship, if you're asking somebody to change things about themselves, you're basically looking down the end of a slippery slope. And it really depends what you're asking them to change. I mean, maybe you're hoping that they'll change the way their glasses look. The style just does not work for you, which is really, it's a comment on the person's fashion sense, but not really much else. Or you could be commenting on their personality and asking like, okay, you should be a little bit more lively, or you should be a little less lively, louder or less loud. What are you hoping that they're going to change? Are you going to change the way they look, the way they laugh, the way they work, approach to religion? There are all sorts of different factors in terms of what you can change. And it's important to remember that whenever you're talking about change, before we even figure out like what you're asking to change, the other person might be totally fine with how they are and is not interested at all in changing. And that's their decision, and their decision about how they run their life needs to be respected. If the way they are now isn't something you can live with, if they don't want to change, well, what's your reaction to that? Can you live with this person having really dorky glasses? Or can you not live with that? Is this something you really just can't handle? It might be one way or the other, and that's fine. But they're going to make their decisions, and you're going to make your decisions based on their decisions. And each person's decisions have to be respected. You have to be able to differentiate also between the idea of working together on a relationship, which by necessity demands change and compromise on both ends, and making the other person into your personal makeover project. One is a healthy relationship. And each relationship, any relationship that you have, is going to demand that each person move a little bit more towards whatever the center between them is. That's just the way relationships work. There's going to be compromise. There's going to be communication about what's important and what's not. And there's going to be agreement. And that's the way relationships go. One person saying, okay, I'm going to change the way you dress, the way you act, the way you talk, the way you walk, the whole business. That's squeezing the person into a really bad suit. And nobody wants to be squeezed into a bad suit. Sometimes people also fall into the trap of assuming that at the right time, for the right person, the person is going to change. A much safer assumption to make is that the person you see before you today will always have some aspect of whatever the trait that you want to change is. Don't expect change. Don't depend on change to make the other person into the ideal spouse. It's not going to happen. You can't expect change. The same way that we said before, you can't expect marriage to be able to fix you or to change you. That's not the way people work. You can't expect the other person to change an aspect of who they are the same way that you can't expect the presence of another person to change who you are. It's very unlikely that the aspect you're asking them to change is a conscious choice. And it's probably not going to be something that they're going to be able to easily change, even if they say like, oh, okay, I could do that, but it's a very hard thing to change. Are you going to be willing to live with the constant struggle of changing something which could potentially be really deeply ingrained in them? If there's one thing about the other person that bothers you or turns you off, assuming that it's not a red flag in terms of their ability to participate in a healthy relationship, think about whether it's something you'd be okay living with for the rest of your life, because there's the possibility that that's going to happen. What are the pros? What are the cons? How would it affect your relationship and how you look at each other? Here are some really great examples. Talking about a person's assertiveness, a person's sense of humor, a person's lack of sense of humor, a person's seriousness about their religious practices, their lack of seriousness. How do they relate to their family? Physical attributes as well. If a person is on the skinnier side, on the heavier side, how would that affect your ability to relate to them for the rest of your life? There are no switches. You can't just flick a switch and turn aspects of the person off. We're not programs. You can't switch them on and off, but you may be able to live with them. You may be able to live with them even if you're not crazy about them. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, let's move on to the next one. And we'll do these last two, I think, together basically.
Yeah.
So for the last two questions, we have, what if I don't meet someone? And is now a good time? So the question of what if I don't meet someone, we included this as one of our questions, really just to bring attention to how common this fear is for people, and how painful this experience that is very much, so specific to the dating phase, weighs on people's hearts. That fear of what if I don't meet someone. And I know that when we looked back at some of the feedback, and some of the comments and stories that people shared with us as part of part one of the webinar, one of the comments that somebody wrote in was, I'm so scared that I might not meet someone, and as I'm getting older, and now I'm at the phase where I need to think about if I should freeze my eggs. I'm scared. What if not only if I don't meet someone, then I might struggle with being able to have children. And we brought in this question because of how how painful it is to really acknowledge that for so many people who are dating, this fear is something that they carry at so many different times in their in their daily lives, and so many parts of their even daily schedule. And I'm thinking about somebody who shared with me that he found himself really avoiding going to a certain minyan that he really wanted to go to, that he enjoyed going to, because, you know, he just felt so embarrassed that at his age and at his stage in his life that he wasn't wearing a tallis. And everybody would know that he's still not married. And I've heard that, you know, that same sentiment shared by women who are at a friend's wedding and, you know, everyone's sitting around the table is wearing a sheitel. And now this is just one more visible barrier, visible, you know, differentiator between this person's life and stage in life and all the people around them. You know, people who at one point they were just doing things at the exact same time. They were all in school together. They were all in Israel together. And now finding themselves being almost just visibly marked as still single, and how much pain that brings up for people. And, you know, and the truth is, of course, we would never bring any kind of like contrived answers or suggestions or recommendations about this question. You know, we could offer some humble, you know, recommendations. And I think that's something that probably, Yishai, when we spoke about just thinking about time, managing time, we would bring this as a question and put it out there, but we really encourage people to please, you know, reach out again, even just for support, to, you know, to our hotline. You can chat in, you can ask questions, you can share your pain. We have individuals who sometimes call just to share how painful dating is for them, or how painful a relationship is for them, and really just looking for support without specific feedback or guidance, just for somebody to be able to provide that supportive listening ear.
Yeah, and that's really, I think, with any difficulty that a person goes through in life, having social support is really one of the most important ways to get through it. If you feel like you're alone, then that increases the pain and the frustration exponentially. If you have other people who are helping you carry it, it becomes much lighter, even if the situation itself doesn't really change.
So let's wrap up with our last question. Is now a good time?
Yeah.
We're
Good
going.
question.
Yeah. So one thing that we wanted to focus a bit for this question is pointing out that sometimes dating during a major transition or distraction sometimes poses risk, where, for example, we've spoken with people where there was a lot going on at home, a lot going on with their families during the time that they were dating someone. You know, there was a major crisis. A sibling was in the middle of getting divorced. And not that two major life events can't happen at the same time, but looking out for distraction and sometimes being the cause for less eyes on the relationship. And if there is something that is going on that's concerning, there might be just too many distractions for that really to receive the proper attention and support, you know, to be able to get help for that. And to be able to recognize if, you know, perhaps this is not the right timing and maybe to wait a little longer. And I know that we've spoken with people who sometimes, you know, will reflect back to their dating phase, and it was almost like a whirlwind, and things were moving really quickly, and things were not yet really in a healthy place, but there was just so much going on, so they just kind of like pushed through, ignored things, you know, got engaged quickly, got married quickly, and just caution about the pace of dating, and really being able to make sure that this is a major life event that receives the right amount of, you know, attention and deliberation around it.
Yeah, for sure. You know, the idea of really giving due attention to this process, like, you want to be comfortable with what you're doing, and you want to really be able to know that you're creating something which could theoretically last the rest of your life in a healthy space. So maybe you can do that, maybe you can't. You're really the only one who can actually give that kind of an answer with any sense of honesty. Which is also, by the way, why it's so important to have people who are outside of your immediate situations, and somebody who's objective and somebody who can give you that objective guidance and can kind of call you out on something. if they see that you're pushing yourself to do something that you're honestly just not up to.
Okay, so at this time, we would like to request that you take a moment. It's very quick, just to fill out our survey. The link is posted on the chat, and this helps us to evaluate our programs. While you're doing so, let's just do a quick recap of ways to get help. And maybe we'll take 2 more minutes just to try to go through some of the questions that people came in. I think even just to list some of the questions that people typed in, just so people hear some of the questions that, that are on people's minds. And maybe we'll, schedule that for another webinar. So just to recap ways to get help, of course, you can reach out to our hotline. Again, we have now our new chat feature. You can text in, you can WhatsApp, the number 888-883-2323. You can check us out on our website, shalomtaskforce.org. We will have the recording of tonight's webinar posted there, as well as the links to our previous webinar, part 1 of this webinar posted there as well. For individuals who are dating, again, really just being honest with yourself, knowing how to get help, knowing to identify helpful mentors, and how transformative that can be, whether it's a mental health professional, whether it is some other mentor in your life, but knowing how to really figure out if this is the right mentor, because getting help from somebody who might not be a helpful person in some ways can be more damaging. So again, you can reach out to us to Shalom Task Force hotline for questions about referrals or just for support. For parents, again, being honest with yourselves about, we all love our children. We all want to support our children, and really being able to, figure out how to be most supportive to your child during this process. Because as overwhelming as the dating stage is for parents, just remembering that, your child is the one who is dating. So making space for your child's experience and getting help for yourself, almost separately, so that you can support your child through this stage. We get requests often for more educational programs. If anybody is interested in bringing a program to your community, you can reach out to us, again, through our website, shalomtaskforce.org. So, Yeshaya, how about if I just list some of the questions that people asked?
Got a few really good ones here.
What's that?
We got a few really good ones here.
Yeah, and let's just put them out there as kind of like food for thought and people to hear what else is on people's minds.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does it usually mean if you make it to the 10-yard line and then the guy says he's not feeling it and ends the relationship? How does a guy get so far and then say something is missing?
Good question.
Yeah. And I think that is very, we've heard that so often, common, unfortunately, and painful, but that definitely comes up a lot. Yeah. So here's another one related again to the attraction. What if you don't know if you are attracted? It's pariv. It's not repulsed, but not growing either.
Yeah. These are also, I feel like I really want to answer these,
Yeah.
So these are good questions.
If a couple has different views on media, how important is that to the relationship? Is it crucial they be on the same page about that, such as watching TV or movies? Yeah, and I think that so often, especially in, in our society, that really, it's almost like, it feels like one of the things that's like, almost like on a resume, like, do you watch movies? Doesn't watch movies. Like sometimes you'll see it in people's bios, right? There's so much emphasis on that. So what happens if you watch movies, but the person doesn't watch movies? Like, how do we reconcile those disparities in our preferences or our, standards? Very important question. Okay, did we do, yeah, we did that. I mentioned that before.
Can we mention this last one here? Oh, it's not the last one, I'm sorry. As a dating person and also a young therapist, how much emotional intelligence and mental health understanding can I realistically expect in my spouse? I speak for both therapists. I think that's a great question. It is a
Wow.
really great question.
Yeah, that's, yeah, really, really. And also again, and I want to, really again, thank everybody here who, has joined us tonight. We had a couple 100 people on the webinar, and I know a number of people also tuned in to watch us on Facebook. And again, we want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for also taking the time to submit your questions. Unfortunately, we're not able to really address everyone's questions, but we read each and every question. Perhaps you'll see one of your questions appear as our, top 10 questions for the next webinar that we do. And we really appreciate being able to collaborate with everyone who's participating tonight in terms of raising awareness and having these sometimes difficult conversations around dating. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we look forward to hopefully doing more of these. Thank you, Yeshaya. Thank you, Jeffrey, again, for the technology. We really appreciate you.
Definitely. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. It's really a great event and great questions that you people are putting out here. And yeah, hopefully we'll address these next time. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah.